The candles on was earlier playing the Pogues, so it must be Christmas time coming. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over a few years, but also last night when we had a really interesting discussion in our leadership team about Reggio Emilia, is the idea that Reggio Emilia often talks about, which is the idea that if you're educating a child, you're educating them for today, and they're citizens and have rights today. Education and learning isn't about being ready for something else. It's not like you're incomplete and then you're waiting for, say, junior school or high school or university or jobs. That in fact it's about having a full life now. These books are really interesting if you haven't read them. So The 100 Languages of Children, which is a book about how in Reggio Emilia children make sense of the world using lots of different kinds of languages, whether that's sort of art or mathematics or clay or dance or sound, or through friendship rituals or any symbolic language essentially. And then this book's really interesting, which Fiona Zinn tweeted about recently, which is essentially a core argument about we shouldn't be defining what childhood is supposed to be and then measuring a deficit against it or expecting children to be in a particular place, but instead we should notice where they are, honour it, and build from there. So I think they're really good books to read about this if you're interested. But I think the core idea reminds me of a famous quote that was attributed to an Eton headmaster. I'm not sure if it's apocryphal or totally accurate, that a parent was complaining about something and saying, oh, but if you're not preparing them for this exam, then what are you preparing them for? And the headmaster apparently, or something like that, and the headmaster famously replied, for death, madam, for death. Both as a joke and as a point. I suppose the serious point is that we all have to be at peace with our life in order to feel that we've led a good life by the time it's over. But a more profound point, I think, is that idea that if you think of education in terms of preparing for something else, then ultimately you're just getting ready to die. So school is to find a university is to find a job. Jobs may or may not be the completion of your life. So while maybe the job is to prepare for really good retirement, and then in a good retirement, I guess what are you doing? You're trying to make sure that you're ready for a peaceful death, and then you're dead. So if you always see life as delayed gratification, that somehow you're waiting to be fully alive, that you're waiting until things are all in place, then actually all you are is nowhere forever. And I think there's a lot of that that's echoed in Reggio, and it always strikes me that, not in a morbid way, but sometimes people talk about education as if it's all preparation for later. And okay, this is a bit of a morbid point, but if a child were to die at 7 years old, so they were nothing, were they? They were just waiting for later. And the answer is no. No, we're all alive for only a certain period, and during that period it has to be as rich and authentic and as mindfully aware and present as possible. So I'm really drawn to Reggio Emilia's point that children aren't something that's incomplete. They're not an adult that hasn't turned into an adult yet, that will find meaning when it's an adult. They, like all living beings, are alive and complete in the moment, and our purpose is to support them. And one thing that sort of interested me about that, and we just, I've continued to think about, is that idea that, Reggio thinks that therefore childhood spaces should be democratic and owned by the children. And we were exploring in our leadership meeting, sort of, okay, is that effective? Does that produce better results? And it's that really interesting argument I kept thinking about of, if you were in a fascist state and saw a democracy, you might say, oh, I wonder why they're interested in democracy. Actually our economy is better, so I wonder why they're doing that. That's a really stupid thing to do, because your measure is an outcome, not a belief in the importance of the way that you live your life in the moment. And I think that's so fundamental about Reggio, that children have rights today and are part of a democratic community, not because that's more effective, not because that will end up with better results, not because it's a better preparation for junior school, not because they think it's cognitively more engaging, but for the same reasons that people like Amartya Sen, that believe in democracy, see it as both an ends and a means of development, that a democratic school is both an end and a mean to development. I think about it a lot, so I'm constantly thinking that and applying it to my own life. If I were to die tomorrow, is this the week that I wanted to live? And rather than seeing everything as a preparation for something else. I think it's hard to do, and I think it's linked to mindfulness. I think they're very related, but it's a really good discipline of thinking to just ask yourself those questions, and about your classroom. Again, not in a morbid way, but I have had students who have died in accidents, and you do want to know that, like, while they were at school, they were having a good life, that it wasn't life delayed, because not all children make it to adulthood, which sounds very morbid, but I think it's a good measure to say, like, so was this week the week of a child's life that was a fulfillment and a fullness of the life they want, not just waiting for later. It's a really important point, I think, and interesting. So if you want to learn more about Reggio Emilia, I would so recommend this book. It's great. It's, a brilliant, interesting, fascinating, challenging book. And if you want the sort of philosophical hardcore about why we shouldn't judge things from the outside but try to understand them from their rights and values from the inside, then this is a really good book.